everybody today? It was a good lunch. I'd like to give a special thanks to Mrs. K in the back for preparing a good meal. A lot goes on behind the scenes that a lot of people don't see, and she is a great, great big part of this group. Right now, I would like to welcome Chris D. from New York City, steps 6 and 7. Please give Chris a welcome.
I'm an alcoholic. My name is Chris. So I'm going to be doing 6 and 7, and it just struck me. Boy, it'd be nice if I had a prayer to begin with. So why don't we just start with? I'll read it, and you guys can just follow along. My Creator, I am now willing that you should have all of me, good and bad. I pray that you now remove from me every single defect of character which stands in the way of my usefulness to you and my fellows. Grant me strength as I go out from here to do your bidding. Amen.
Amen.
So, you just completed step 7. Congratulations, everybody. It says it. I mean, if you haven't done it yet, there it is. So thank you, Ron, for asking me and for getting me on the panel today. It's been awesome so far. So hopefully I'm just going to do my best to just kind of continue where the guys left off. I was kind of surprised that I had so much more identification with Chris than we're both named Chris, but like I was like wondering if there's something to the idea of like guys that are named the same, like their personalities kind of depict that sort of like just the daredevil stuff and like all that, like very specifically I was like yep, government job, yep, like all that stuff was very similar. So let me start with some gratitude too. I'm just grateful to be able to do this sort of thing. I definitely intend on when I ever hear speakers say something like if I could just help one person, if I can help one person, my intention is absolutely to help everybody in the room. I want everybody to get at least something, out of this. But I know for a fact that I definitely need to be up here. No coincidence that I wound up speaking about 6 and 7. That's where I, slotted out on the ticket here today. And also just grateful for my girlfriend being here and that we're expecting a child, our first together, a couple of months away. Yeah. And, so that's really cool. And I've just started to, download fears I've never known I had, like I didn't have them. I don't think I did have them, but they're coming from somewhere and I can't write fast enough, to keep up with all of the different fears that are coming from, it started with the financial fear. Like I felt like I was in a really good place where the promise of like financial insecurity had left me. It's back. It's definitely back. And I did some reading that's biological actually, that kind of taps into the provider, the security, safety that and in our culture, right? It's like financially, it's just like I tapped into it. So that was one. And then another fear I had, which is, whatever. But I just had this idea of being on my deathbed, and Julie and my son just kind of looking at me and, just kind of shaking their head you could have done more, or, just like you're a little bit of a disappointment, Dad. But, I mean, you did okay. You did pretty good, but you could have done better. So now imagine if that was something that I wasn't aware of, right? And that's what this program has given me, And so what everything that has been said already, right? It's like it's almost unfair how I wrecked my life and then I get like the toolkit on how to live, right? And get to be able to contribute and feel like the spiritual growth and like all that stuff that comes from, working this program, all because I wrecked my life, and I did it a bunch, So to not be aware of that. So what I'd like to talk about a little bit is the problem with self-sufficiency. One of the things that in the third step, as Chris mentioned, right, that we want to be convinced that any life run on self-will can hardly be a success, right? And so there's like this requirement that we be convinced of that in moving forward. So initially, I think that I'm coming here because the problem is alcohol. And of course, I'm going to be focused on the problem being alcohol, but then I'm going to find that that alcohol was more the solution for my problem, and the problem has far more to do with what we're going to get into here with it, which is the self-sufficiency, the self-reliance, just the self in general, the ego self, the false self, an erroneous sense of identity, all that sort of stuff that's become far more popular today, right? Just the idea of identifying with a self, and that I am my thoughts and I am my feelings, and that and not having the capacity to, like Chris said also, like just the idea of like not knowing that when I'm in fear or that when I'm angry, that I have far more of a role to play in that than I ever knew before, right? That I am like far more responsible for permitting, I'm actually giving permission to the fear. I'm giving permission to that anger to be here, right? And I don't, without the steps, obviously I don't know that, and I'm just kind of moving around in the world like an automaton, being driven by 100 forms of fear, self-delusion, self-seeking, self-pity, right? And then I'm constantly at odds with the people around me. I'm stepping on people's toes, even when my intentions are good, right? So, speaking of deathbed, right? Like if anybody ever kind of talks about like, well, who was he after someone dies and they're giving the eulogy, right? No one's ever talking about what they intended to do. What did he do? It's about the actions, right? So if I don't get this stuff squared away, right? What's driving my behavior, I'm not running that show. Either I'm working this program or a program is working me. But there's going to be some kind of program that's running things. So I can be kind of co-creating, I can be involved in that process, or I could just be run by it, right? And for so long, I was run by it. And so let me just give a couple of examples. And I'm going to start the story here with I came into AA. I was very young. I grew up in Rockaway Beach, New York. It's the kind of town that can only be described as drunk. It's just a drunk town. And so that's pretty much enough of a qualification as far as that, and then I wound up in AA at 17 years old. Both of my parents were in AA. A lot of my family was in AA. And so I never had this luxury of an unknowing drink. I was basically a controlled drinker immediately. I was immediately trying to not have to wind up in AA, and how am I going to make this work? But so it's I'm very grateful that obviously that was my experience and I got in young. And I think I was very, idyllic and maybe somewhat naive, but I was in Catholic high school. It was the kind of high school we went to Mass every day, Monday through Friday, first thing in the morning. So that's kind of unique. And so there was a kind of natural spiritual growth that was coming just from that kind of discipline, to have that sort of resolve that was being provided daily. It was just kind of like, and then to go from like living the double life to now being sober and making this, these masses every day. It was kind of like, a new appreciation, a new reverence for spirituality. interestingly enough, I started to also pull away from some of the dogma, and started to feel more connected. And, about 2 months into my sobriety, I got a sponsor because I heard everybody talking about that. About 4 months in, I asked that sponsor about the steps, and he wasn't really a step guy. So he took me to a 4th step workshop. I don't remember anything about what they did prior to getting to the 4th step, but I'm pretty sure that they did talk about 1, 2, and 3, but I wasn't really, paying attention. I just followed the format that they gave, right? So it was just like this little written exercise that I did, right? And then I finished, and I took that to one of the priests in my school, and I did the 5th step with him, which basically just involved me reading what I wrote. And, just a plug, just even for that little process. I mean, when I walked out of the office, it was like I was floating down the hallway, right? That's how much just came off of my 17-year-old self, right? That it was just like, whoa. I really did feel free. And then I went home and, I opened that booklet again, and it said something about, doing all sorts of stuff that's basically here. But, I think I might have said the prayer then. And then I started my 8-step list by, getting a notebook and a pen. And I wrote one name, and I closed the book. And that was the end of my step work from then on. So I remember when I first came around, there was a guy who said, he came into the rooms and he looked at the shade and he did the steps in 5 minutes. If you hear anybody say something like that, right? Where they just read it and just kind of nodded their head and said, yeah, okay, yeah. And I was like, yeah, I did the same thing. But I also, when I got to 4 and 5, and this was before I even had that experience, I looked at it and I was just kind of like, yeah, no, I'm not going to do that. And 6 and 7, it's almost like I read it and I didn't respond at all. Just moved right past it. Just moved right past it and went to 9 and said, not going to do that. And then prayer was like, yeah, okay. And then, I'll shake some people's hands in 12. Sure. I'll stand at the door. So that was me doing the steps. And, so I was thinking there's a particular kind of avoidance when it came to 6 and 7. That's almost deeper than me looking at 4 or 5 or looking at 9 and saying, I'm not going to do that, versus just kind of remaining ignorant. And I was kind of wondering which of those is a stronger version of avoidance, right? I'm not even processing 6 and 7. I just read it and just kind of blow right past it, right? And maybe because there was just humility. What do I know about humility? It just seemed beyond me. And the language of it. There's, when Bill wrote the big book and, we moved from the 6 steps of the Oxford group to then his writing. And then when he was finished, we had 12 steps. And it was okay, that's a pretty good, but he called it some of the alcoholics, they were coming in and they were kind of wiggling loose, they were wiggling free through some of the 6 steps. So I wanted to write these loophole closers. And so that's the expansion. We moved to 12 to close the loopholes, right? So when you get to 6 and 7, entirely ready, not a lot of room. Not a lot of room to sneak through anywhere on that, right? So when I had about 6 months of sobriety, my first time around, I had pretty much followed every suggestion that had been made of me. And I had hit bottom at a keg party. So 6 months earlier, it was a keg party I hit bottom at. And so now 6 months later, same kid, same house, he's having a keg party. And I'm I'm going, right? Because I'm going to show him, right, how good I'm doing. Maybe I'll be an example. The humility was definitely, I'll show them what's possible for them. And so I'm talking to my sponsor, and my sponsor says, Chris, I don't think it's a good idea. And, we talked a little bit about it, and ultimately I decided to go to the keg party. And I wound up, white-knuckling my way through this party. And it wasn't that I wanted to drink, it just, white-knuckling it like I can't stand being here. Just the energy and the vibe of it, and these kids used to be guys I hung out with. I don't want anything to do with them. I just dropped off the planet for 6 months, right? People, places, and things, I took it seriously. This was like my triumphant return, and within 5 minutes I was like, get me out of here. But now, due to pride, right, I can't leave. I gotta show them. I can hang out, I can stay here. And so I've constructed, or when I say I mean, here's this self-imposed trap that's now, I'm captured by, held captive to, and I stay all the way until about, until sunrise, like we used to do, and just in the dark, and the guys are doing, all sorts of, crazy, stuff. That was a time when the clubs, when they first started using glow sticks and everything, and they're just doing that in the living room. It's like, oh my God. So I suffered my way through that, and then I went to a noon meeting, and I said, all right, I learned my lesson. That was kind of silly. I'm not going to go to any keg parties. And everybody just kind of laughed and like, yeah, okay, yeah, it's good you learned your lesson. And so here's what I learned. I don't have to listen to my sponsor anymore. Because whatever he was worried about happening didn't happen. I made it through. And now begins my adventure in self-sufficiency, right? And so over that time frame, and man, again, just the power of what I did, the 4 and 5 that I did with a priest, right? Not knowing anything about 1, 2, 3, really. Because as it was explained, I was definitely the alcoholic that was just saying, like, my name's Chris, I'm an alcoholic, and wouldn't have been able to give you any explanation whatsoever of what alcoholism was. If you would have asked me, I would have just said, it means I can't drink. That's it. Like, that would have been as far as my definition went. So no real semblance of understanding of 1, 2, 3. I did 4, 5, I made meetings. That bought me, at 18 years old, 3 years of sobriety. Now, sobriety, but still, not drinking, right? Not drinking for that time frame, which is truly a blessing when you think about from 17 to 21 in my neighborhood. That's pretty good, right? And I'm sure brought a lot of peace and calm and serenity to my mother during that 3.5-year stretch, right? But just some of the decisions that I made. Somewhere along the line, I won't really get in the timeline. I'll just give you a couple of quick hits, right? I started working and doing mortgages, like just doing mortgage refinances and stuff like that. And I was in college at the time, and I just said, I don't need to go to college anymore. So I just dropped out. I dropped everything I was in, and I just walked out the door. Decision unchecked. Now, I was driving a pretty good car. There was nothing wrong with that car, but now I was making some money, so I said, let me buy a flaming red Camaro Z28 94. This thing's hot. And so I just got rid of this car, and I just plunked the money down on that car, okay? I started dating a girl in AA. 2 sickies don't make a welly. That was one of my favorites. But 2 ding-a-lings don't make a bell. I like that too. And I'm pretty sure that she said she was bipolar, but I just kind of moved right past it. So I took that on. 19, 20 years old. I was arrested in sobriety. I was arrested. My mother had to pick me up from the Queens Detention Center on Mother's Day. 3 years sober. One of the final decisions I made unchecked was, because now I'm not making any money. I went from being a mortgage broker who was, 19, 20, making 50,000. Again, wait, you have to pay taxes on this money? So when I moved into the next year, no more, everything, the economy just crashed, probably partly because of my efforts. And like I'm not making any money, I have to pay taxes, all that stuff. And so I go from like having a $10,000 October as a 19-year, it's insane, to I made $6,000 the entire year after, right? And so I was like, I should start DJing in the bar. So that was the last decision unchecked that I made. And I'm DJing in the bar, and I make it for a while. And suffice it to say, I started drinking again. And, I want to just move right past that. I might, typically I would probably tell that story, but in just the stuff with 6 and 7, I want to talk, basically, I relapsed half a dozen times, okay? I had that 3.5-year period. I had another good stretch of almost 2 years of sobriety, but I never got into the steps in a real way any of those times. And so this time, I did get into the steps in a real way. But now I want to just talk about the importance of 6 and 7 because I still didn't really grasp what was going on here. It was like the ego self, or whatever you want to call it, it was still very much running the show, and I was looking at loopholes that weren't there, right? Like I just didn't really go through the step the way that it's intended, what the implication is, okay? So I'm, in brief, I'm in a relationship, right, with like, 2, 3, 4 years, and I wind up getting married, and I'm doing stuff that is not going to support a successful marriage, and I'm relatively unaware of it. Like I don't know in a real way what I'm doing, Now, it's not to say that I didn't know it. It's on paper. Right? I had done a 4 and a 5 with a sponsor that was pretty proficient, but I was unable to get to the place where I needed to humbly ask for it to be removed. And, what wound up happening was, so just one other funny idea is the fact that it's very similar to, just alcoholism in general, and the fact that it's like I'm the last guy to know that this is a problem, right? And so in the very same way, it's like now you have a behavior, and you can just, whatever behavior that's going to be for you, whether it's gambling related or sex related, food related, sugar related, shopping related, overspending or debt related, there's literally over 250 other 12-step based fellowships. For all the stuff that if you really go through the steps in a real way, at least this has been my experience now, 6 and 7 is where you get to like kind of handle all that stuff. Now it's gonna, I don't know, I'll try to explain it as I go. So the funny thing is like, well, once I get married, I'll fix it. Which is like the story of whenever you have like, whenever two people in AA, or not, but just when people are active and they tell their story and they just say like, and then I thought, I'll get married and that'll fix the drinking, right? Or I get married, or I'll have a kid. And once we have children, that's when it will get better, right? And that seems like sane. It seems like it's a reasonable like solution, like that's something that might actually work. Well, it was the same thing with this sort of thing, right? Like, so the behavior, whether it's money or whatever. But I thought, well, if I get married, that'll get fixed. And it didn't get fixed, right? And I didn't have the tools of doing this kind of regular self-examination. So this time around, when I went through, 1 through 5, I'll read just this idea here. So this is right after the 5th step. Returning home, we find a place where we can be quiet for an hour, carefully reviewing what we have done. We thank God from the bottom of our heart that we know Him better. How is it that doing 1 through 5 gets us to a place where now we've started to know God better? And it's because we've started to take a real hard examination of what self looks like. we've started to take a peek at what life might be like if I were to not have all this stuff going on, then what are you left with? Well, you're left with what's really here. You know, like the idea of when you're going to make this sort of decision, humbly asking God to remove all, there's another loophole closer, all of our shortcomings, right? Like taking everything, the good and the bad, all of it gone, right? What will become of me? I'll look like the hole in the donut, right? Now that's from the third step, but the idea of that, like the illusion is thinking that you're the whole donut. I don't know. You are the hole in the donut. Ultimately, like all of the spiritual people that are doing all of the sort of practice and stuff like that, like spirituality through subtraction. It's not about addition. It's not about bringing in more stuff, doing more, getting more, being more. You're it already. Get rid of the stuff that you're trying to do and just be. It's already there. The same power that the Dalai Lama has within him, that when he's walking around, you can just feel for blocks away that, oh, the Dalai Lama's nearby. That energy is available to you right now, right here. It's the very same energy that the Dalai Lama. There's nothing different about the Dalai Lama or any other spiritual person than anybody else in this room. He's gone about the work of removing self. This is a ready-made process for us to go about the same deal. How do I be rid of self? So if I am rid of self, and this is just kind of like a glimpse in 1 through 5, I can start to know God better. So then I take the book down from the shelf, turn to the page containing the 12 steps, and I carefully read the first 5 proposals. They want to really make sure you got everything, right? Carefully read the first 5 proposals. Ask, have you omitted anything? Is there anything that's still left to do? Like really sitting with this and like, okay. Like, I mean, this is like really like the readiness of this decision, because you're going to get ready to do something that's very different than what you did when you first came in here, right? When you first came in here, you thought this was about alcohol. And as destructive and massive that problem was, it was just a singular behavior. What's going to happen with 6 and 7 is you're going to give up the whole deal. You're going to try, the idea being, we are going to turn over everything. I mean, I'm kind of stunned just saying it. You know, like what, like really? So and all I can do is just share my experience. And so that's what I'm doing. Anything that you guys go like, oh, that's pretty good. I almost certainly stole that from somewhere else. Well, I borrowed it, right? I've heard it from somewhere else. And anything that you guys hear where you just kind of look at me like in stunned befuddlement, I probably came up with that. So you can feel free to just disregard that. But the last time I heard a 5th step, we kind of just went over this idea, and the analogy we came up with, and I don't know that, hopefully you get some benefit from this, but it worked for me, this idea of like Alexander the Great and Greece, and they're being attacked by Persia, right? Now I don't even know if the story is real. I'm just using these figures, these historical, I don't know. So we got Alexander the Great, and so here's the problem. The problem is we're being attacked by Persians, right? We need to solve this problem, and here's what I believe, that we can get a force together and we could invade Persia. We can go to, and you can imagine the other Greeks being like, we're having a hard enough time just handling this over here. You want to go over there? You want to take them on over there? But the belief that Alexander the Great has is so strong that they start to believe, well, maybe we can. Maybe we can do this. And so Alexander the Great and the rest of the Greeks, they make the decision, we are going to invade Persia. Now, once you make that decision, that's got to be followed by action. So let's take an inventory. What do we got here? We got to get the spears, saddle up the horses. We got to get the elephants on the ships. Let's get the ships built. I mean, we got a lot of stuff we got to do. There's a lot of action to take. And then you get on the boat, you got all the supplies, you got all the forces, you're ready to go. You sail across the sea. You get to Persia, you get off the boats, we ready to fight? Yeah! You guys with me? Are you ready? Yeah! Are you ready? Yeah! Okay, burn the boats. Still ready? Burn the ships. Because we're not going back. 6 and 7, it's like it would be insane if I would go back to being the way that I used to be. Because of what I just discovered in 4 and 5. To go back to being driven by these fears, the self-delusion, the self-seeking, the self-pity, to do this day in and day out and just be this puppet on a string, just kind of moving through, just trying to like make it to the end and just trying to figure out what was all that about. Like having it would just be insane to go back to that. But here's what's also important about 6 and 7. Once you've closed the loopholes, essentially burning the boats, you can't just stay on the beach. And that was the first problem I had when I originally arrived at 6 and 7. The psychological torture that is being dry in Alcoholics Anonymous is brutal, right? And it just leaves you in a position where it's just like you're just defenseless against one day eventually taking a drink, but just think about it. On Mother's Day, 3 years, there was another time where I was doing I went to some spiritual breakfast that my mother managed to somehow get me to go to, and my mother's sponsor saw me there. And later on, when I got sober, she told me that I saw you, I took one look at you, and I immediately said, like, I got to add him to my prayer list. Imagine you walk into a room and that makes a woman just lunge for the rosary beads, right? I was telling this story. Me and my mom, we were doing a big book study together, which is pretty cool, right? So like, she's got 42, 43 years now of sobriety. So we were doing this big book study together, which was awesome. And I think we were right around probably, 8 and 9, and she was telling some story, and then she was like, oh, and Christopher, and she went into this story, and she said, like, and this was what, so Christopher, when he was drinking, he did da, and she told this whole story, and then when she was done, I said, Mom, I was 2 years sober when that happened. Selfish, self-centered, in the extreme, right? Just not drinking. So 6 and 7 is like this. It's almost like I view it like it's like this turning point, right? And anybody play video games here? Any video game players? Not a big video game crowd. Okay, so I used to play Mario Brothers when I was little, and I used to hate Mario Brothers because you would only have so many chances. You would just go through the game, and then if you ran out of chances, like that's it, and you start all over. The worst thing in the world for me is starting all over. I hate starting all over, and unfortunately, I started all over like 7 times, until I finally, where the hell this analogy is going, but somewhere along the line, I'm not a big video game guy myself, but I did drop out of college once playing Xbox. And one of the games I used to play was a game called Splinter Cell. And all the games are like this now, but once you've made a certain amount of progress, you have a checkpoint. You have a place where you can, it saves your progress. It's a place where you can now return to there if, as you move forward, you don't do so well, you don't have to go all the way back to the beginning, you just come right to the checkpoint, right? And that is where, and that's why I said, when I started that there's no coincidences, at 6 and 7. That's where I kind of feel like I've been the last 2 months. It doesn't really take very much well, let me just say this. If I'm doing everything that I'm supposed to do, the important thing is that the thing I was saying before about staying on the beach. You can't stay on the beach. You have to move forward. So 6 and 7 is about now moving forward through the rest of the steps, right? It's continuing on. we didn't have any success just because we made it to the shores. Now we have to move forward. And so I have the experience of not doing that, and I've, tumbled all the way back down, And now what's happened in my life is to kind of have those sorts of experience, whereas I have done this 12 steps, but I've tumbled back down to the checkpoint. And typically that's because of one of those sorts of behaviors, or some new behavior develops, or some new fears arrive, new whatever. You start getting angry about new things. You have new relationships, new hires, new, whatever. Different life experiences happen, and if you're not along the steps, it's really easy for selfishness, dishonesty, resentments, fear to start to crop up and play more of a significant role in my day-to-day living. And if I'm not doing those things like prayer, meditation, regular self-examination, helping other people, working the steps with a sponsor, taking others through the steps out of the big book, so working with sponsees, regularly attending meetings, whatever that looks like for you, but just doing those regular kind of things that the program teaches us to do in moving forward, it's real easy for one of these sorts of behaviors to start dominating your day, to day living, and so all of a sudden I start, just like I said, that fear. I'm not even aware of all the fears that I've developed because the baby's on the way, like I said. And, and so here's what happens. It's kind of like gradual change when it comes to 6 and 7. Looks like I finally, since I'm the last one to know, I finally get over the hump of, oh, this is a problem. The way that the book describes it, which is just a great word, are we now ready to let God remove from us all the things which we have admitted are objectionable? Objectionable to me. My level of awareness has to arrive at a point where, frivolously gambling my money away is objectionable to me now. I might have been able to get away with that for a while. But it's only through working the rest of the steps that I'm going to have that sort of awareness, if that makes sense. You know what I mean? So it's not like I'm going to just kind of realize that on my own, at least in my own experience, the way that I'm as best trying to just explain it. And so I had a particularly painful experience last year in Las Vegas. And it's better that you just use your imagination for something like that. But that was something that then it was like, oh, you know what? I'm entirely ready to have this not be a thing anymore, And so it's like kind of like seeing like, of course, that stuff is going to come up. But hopefully, with the level of awareness and the things that you're doing, you're going to catch it. And that is potentially a gift. It's something that you'll be able to look at and accept and kind of welcome almost. Rather than what I typically do, which is I admit that it's a problem, and then that can go on for who knows how long. Just sitting in kind of the knowing that this is now objectionable to me can take who knows how much. I mean, I don't know how much more is going to happen, but I could be there for a while before eventually, hopefully, I go, you know what? Not only is it a problem, but I'm going to need some help. It's amazing how long it takes me sometimes to get from there to there. And then if you're anything like me, it's also going to be a little bit of a spread to go from, now that help, that's going to have to come from a higher power. And then that's where the humility comes in. And I just have, just multiple examples of things like that go on when all of a sudden, I'm not meeting with my sponsees as much. I'm not talking to my sponsor as much. I'm not in my nightly inventory, on a regular basis. I'm not starting the day on page 84 and 88. I'm not making as many meetings, or I'm making the same amount of meetings, but now, because of everything that's suffering, I'm not making enough meetings. Before, it was a pretty good number of meetings, but now, it's like the only thing you got going on. And if you just start to feel it. And when that starts to happen, it's pretty bad. So let me just say, like, what'll happen to me is let's say that I'm now stuck in fear, or I'm stuck in like feeling angry. The first thing is like, I don't want to feel this way. If you talk to Julie, she'll be able to explain this to you better. Just observing me, she'll be able to explain what I'm trying to say. I feel like as of late, like the last couple of months, it's been like a feeling of like I'm not doing enough or something. Like I need to be doing more. It's not working. Why isn't this working? And now I'm trying to exert my will on getting it to work and doing more. And what I'm doing is relying on a self that isn't there. There's no actual self to rely on. Like willpower, right, which we know we have none of when it comes to alcohol. The willpower piece is, and this is not just true for alcoholics, it's true for humans. The science is out on this, that willpower is a limited resource. It's something that you might start out the day with like X amount of units of willpower. But as your day moves on, you go through those, and then you don't got much left, right? And the more that you're relying on your own resources, right? Like one of my favorite speakers says, I'm the pipe, I'm not the well, right? I'm not the source of the power, but I could channel it if I just get out of the way, right? Then there's plenty of energy. There's plenty of energy if I am not trying to exert my own. So when the problems come up in my life, if I start to try and suppress that thing, or repress it, or use self-reliance, or self-sufficiency, or do something to try and mitigate it in some kind of way, there's a self working against the self, and there's no self. Now I'm stuck in this kind of vicious cycle, a mini vicious cycle, if you will, of trying to, use the good, what I believe is good about me, the moral standard or the moral code, and say, well, this is not good, and so now I'm going to try and suppress it. I'm going to try and repress this thing, what I deem as bad. When acceptance works just as well. I could just simply accept it. I could just accept that I have both good and bad, and ask God, can you take all of me, good and bad? Oh, that's much easier. If I just go, oh, okay, God, you can have this, and I can just get out of the way. And then what do you want? What do you want me to do? And then, the next step is like, all right, go see Joe because you owe him money. Oh, okay, God, all right, we'll go. And then we're just going to go and start to do the things that, well, why don't you start working with this guy? Because, didn't he call you the other day? Oh, let me call him back. Yeah, okay. And then you just start, because now the channel is free again, right? And I'm not just stuck on self and relying on myself. And so it's kind of like the serenity prayer, where for a long, long time now, I'm sober 11 years now, right? So like literally for the first 10 years, I think I was just on that first part of the serenity prayer, which is, God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. And I just stayed there. It was just very pleasant. In fact, not just pleasant, it was revolutionary. Let me not downplay how amazing that was when I first got here and started to implement the serenity prayer, saying it 100 or a couple hundred times a day because I needed to, right? I mean, and being able to say, I don't got this, man. I'm turning it over. Just let go, let God. I'm sitting back. This is so much easier. I'm just going to accept the things I can't change. Just accept it. Accept it. Great. And then never get to the courage to change the things I can. So there's a huge discrepancy here, and here's what I do, and this is the nuts and bolts of 6 and 7 for me, is I try to change the things I can, rather than ask God for the courage to do it. Now that is a simple fix, but man, do I get stuck in that all the time. Me trying to change it, me trying to exert my power of will into whatever. And so it seems like when that happens that, well, I don't want to feel this way. And then there's this kind of like expectation that comes where it's like, I'm not supposed to feel this way because of how far I've come, like, so I don't want to feel this way, I'm not supposed to feel this way, and I'm always going to feel this way. This is never going to change, right? I'm always going to have this sense of dread now on me, and I get stuck down the rabbit hole of self. That's where the ego wants me, right? Just because I don't drink today doesn't mean that my alcoholism isn't satisfied with its efforts. If it can make me miserable, if it can make me angry, if it can get me having that sense again of impending doom, it's going to take that. It's going to go check, that was a good day. But what if, and this is one of the things that comes with working the rest of the program in the perspective shift, as we've kind of gone over, and this is like one of the miracles of the program for me, is that what if the opposite is true, right? Like, what if I'm wrong? Anybody here ever think they were 100% right and then you were proven that you were wrong? Anybody have that? Yeah. So how do I know I'm right this time? So obviously when I say I'm always going to feel this way, we know that that's not true, right? As soon as that comes in and it just feels like this overwhelming sense of dread, I'm always going to feel like this, oh, this is it. How did I get here again? That's the feeling. The feeling is like, how am I back here? How did I get here again? I don't want to be here. I shouldn't be here. I'm always going to be here. That's just Tuesday. That's just a regular, if I'm not working the rest of the steps, if I'm not doing the deal, right? I get stuck there. Thank God it's a checkpoint, right? Because essentially if I'm using my idea from before, it's kind of like I start doing a 180-degree turn, like I'm going to start walking back for the beach. If you would just make it simple, like if you say I'm either moving towards a drink or away from a drink. It's like I've made a 180-degree turn and now I'm starting to move towards a drink, right? And what do I feel? I feel a sense of impending doom. That's appropriate. And that's the gift. That's the perspective shift, right? When I say I shouldn't be feeling this way, yes, I should. Because I'm sane now. I've been restored to sanity. I have a higher power in my life. I have all of these checks and balances so that as soon as I start doing a behavior that doesn't line up with what God would have me do, I start feeling bad. So I should be feeling that way. And the truth is that I have begun to invite that. So I don't want to feel this way? No, I do. I want to feel that way because my will is aligned with God's will now. It's the idea of, like when we discussed earlier this morning, this idea of turning our will and our lives over to the care of God, right? The way that I kind of looked at that and the steps was this idea of I was driving the car and I totaled it. I mean, it's bad. I did a really bad job driving the car, and what I'm going to ask God to do is take the wheel. And God says, okay, I'll take the wheel. But that's not the design. The design, God wants me behind the wheel. And God's going to sit in the back seat and he's going to tell me where to go. And I'm just going to follow directions. Right? That's more of the way that I kind of look at it. Right? So turning over to the care like that, it's just kind of like letting God take the wheel for this time being while I go through the necessary stuff to get myself to a place where I can now align my will with God's will. Somewhere along the line, and in the 12 and 12, in step 7, Bill talks about that idea of wanting humility for the sake of humility, just for its own sake, like where I don't have to get to the place where I get like repeated humiliations anymore. It becomes something that I want for myself, where it just becomes that's that in and of itself. And so it's like, okay, God, where do you want me to go now? You know, like I get excited about it versus, you know, putting up the divider, you know, as I'm driving and not taking any direction, you know. So I don't know the tangent I was going on with that. Think about closing this up. So, oh yeah, right. So inviting the pain. That was where I was. Somewhere like a couple of months back, when I was feeling a certain kind of way, I must have been journaling to myself, and I just kind of just had that sort of question of like why do humans feel feelings? Anyway, like why do we feel emotions? What's it all about? Like why do we feel, right? And then taking it to the next level, so anything that I might deem negative, right, of anger or just anything like that, why am I feeling that? What if the reason that I'm feeling that is because it's like a warning signal? It's like if it was something that was coming from somewhere else, if I didn't look at it like it was a negative and I looked at it like as it was a positive, that this can serve as an indication that I don't want to be doing whatever it is that I'm doing. I don't want to be facing wherever I'm facing. I don't want to be moving in that sort of direction or whatever it might be. Because ultimately, right, the greatest pain I've ever been in my entire life led me to Alcoholics Anonymous, right? What else? If there was a higher power, or just like a deeper sense of self, or higher self, or a real me, how else would I communicate with me if I was heading in the wrong direction? Other than to just be like, "Arr!" internally. You know? If that was, you know, if you're going to buy this premise, right? Like this idea of like, how else would it go? Especially when there's 60 to 70,000 thoughts coming through my head every day, right? I don't know which one's which, but a feeling I feel. And so if there's a feeling, a pang of just like, no, today, because of working the steps and because of all the other things that I've experienced as a result of just traveling down this road, it's like, okay, what's behind that emotion? You know, another just seconding for prayer and meditation, that I'm able to sit with the feeling now. I don't have to run away from the pain response like I used to. I can just breathe into it. I can settle down and I can just kind of watch that pain go away and be, well, just be. And there is a tremendous peace and freedom that comes from that. And then to think that if there would have been one quotient less pain, right? Just a little bit less remorse or a little bit less guilt or shame or whatever, I might not have ever made my first meeting. I needed every bit of it to get to where I am now. So, again, this is just where I'm at today, right? And my take on 6 and 7. But what I feel it's kind of connected to is this idea that it's kind of like this fail-safe. It's like a stopgap. It's like this place where I don't have to get into this morbid self-reflection or this self-pity or beating myself up because I'm feeling bad. What I can do is ask, what's good about this? What might this be trying to tell me? And what can I do to get out of it? I'll close with this idea. My sponsor, as bad as it was just a couple of weeks ago, I finally call my sponsor. And when I get him on the phone and I start going over everything, when I'm like in crisis basically now, because it's like all systems and I'm stuck in it. I mean, I'm really in it. And he just goes like, he's just like, all right, Chris, look, I know that you feel like you have to tell me everything that's happened over the last, like weeks, right? It's like, just write inventory on yesterday. Just give me just the 9 questions in the nightly inventory. Just do that for yesterday. And are you going to a meeting tonight? Okay, so you're going to a meeting tonight. Why don't you you got the meeting. Why don't you reach out to one or two of your sponsees today, see how they're doing. And you're going to do nightly inventory tonight. So as you move through the rest of this day, just be conscious of that. Keep that in your awareness that you're going to be writing an inventory tonight about what you do today. By 9 o'clock that night, I was like a different person. So it's not like I have to do, that's what I mean, like it's not like I have to tumble all the way down the scale. Because when I turn that 180 degrees and I start heading towards a drink, the alarm bells go off harder and harder with each step. But as soon as I get redirected and I turn back around, I realize that I really didn't go very far at all. That's the gift. The gift of 6 and 7 and the gift of whatever, pain I might not be wanting to feel. It's a gift. What's good about this? What might this be trying to tell me? Thank you.
All right.
Amazing job. Thank you. Great, big talk. Please, one more time for Chris. Take some time to thank them, thank every one of our speakers, because they do come here at their own time and expense on a beautiful Saturday to share with you guys. We got a fresh pot of coffee on. We got a 15-minute smoke break, whatever break, food break, whatever it is, and we'll come back here, and Lena's going to be going on next. Don't miss that. Anyway, that nice way of closing. If you want to say, let's say a little prayer together. No? Real quick. I'll tell you what, moment of silence, do with whatever you care to do with it. If you care to join us, we'll end with the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Good job.